In a bizarre turn of events, since my last video, the Desert Bloom Precon is now racing to become the cheapest of the 4 OTJ Commander Precons, landing at $30 at the time of recording.
Wow.
I'm never not going to look at the best reprints in a deck, but when a deck gets this low in price, things get way more interesting. Ancient Green Warden, $11. Oracle of Moldiah, $6. Ramunap Excavator, $5. Avenger of Zendikar, $4. Scoot Swarm, $4. World Shaper, $4. Well, I guess things didn't get too interesting. But if you combo those top reprints with some classics, some new spells, and some other generally cool stuff, things keep looking up. You're not committing highway robbery at this price point, but I would say that now is the time to get on the horse if you're interested. And let's get into it. We got a land deck to talk about. No, we have a desert deck to talk about. If you don't know what we do here, 6 cards are going in the deck and 6 cards are getting cut. 1 for each card type found in the deck. Creature, sorcery, instant, artifact, enchantment, and land. This time your hyper budget upgrade is not so hyper at $4.72, but I know you'll forgive me because I've got those 6 goodies and at least a dozen more spells coming your way. Yuma Proud Protector is the commander of choice at a whopping 5 mana and a Naya. And yes, I do believe that is a baby cactus Yoda in his arms. He's a 6/6 and fortunately can cost as little as 3 mana thanks to his first ability, costing 1 less to cast for each land card in your graveyard. This is the best kind of reduction, cause that can eat away at the commander tax as well. The second ability is an enter or attack trigger, giving you the choice to sacrifice a land to draw a card. That's a pretty scary prospect, but Yuma butters up the deal because his third ability creates a 4/2 green plant warrior with reach whenever a desert is put into your graveyard. Importantly, not only from the battlefield, but from your hand, your library, or even exile. Side note, consider me in on the Cowboy Cacti tokens. I wanted to drop a goofy pun here, but the set actually took all those. Anyway, you want lands in your graveyard ASAP to make your commander cheap to cast. You want ways to get your deserts, of which there are 15 in the precon, available to you in some fashion. You want ways to get those deserts into the graveyard while Yuma is on the battlefield. And finally, ways to get those deserts out of the graveyard, giving Yuma the chance to keep churning out more and more cacti. Starting with creatures, Colossal Rattleworms got Synergy, gaining flash if you control a desert. And as a 2 and 2 green 6/5 with trample, flashing this in is going to kill an unexpected attacker, while being an offensive threat in its own right. If it ends up in the graveyard, that 1 and a green ability will exile the creature to go fetch a desert from your library to put right on the battlefield. The more ways you can consistently get your deserts into play, the better off you're going to be. Colossal Rattleworm is 45 cents. Angel of the Ruins is the creature cut. Naya is a combination of colors that can deal with artifacts and enchantments better than any other combination, so I'm not interested in a 7 mana creature doing that job. Besides, there are no artifact synergies, no angel synergies. The deck can't abuse the entering the battlefield effect. And I heard its favorite Kardashian is Kim. Could you imagine having a favorite Kardashian? It's gotta go. Moving on to sorceries, I'm leaning into those cowboy cacti with Shamanic Revelation. This 3 and 2 green sorcery will have you draw a card for each creature you control. The Ferocious ability tacks on 4 life gained for each of those creatures with power 4 or greater. Having a commander with greater than 4 power is a great start. And then those 4/2 plant warrior creatures exactly meet that threshold. If your deck is even barely doing the thing, you could be looking at least 3 drawn cards and 12 life, with enormous upside. Shamanic Revelation is 60 cents. Savine's Reclamation is the sorcery cut. I've talked about how you want to get your deserts out of the graveyard, but this sorcery is probably the weakest version of this effect in the deck, and the mana value bump and the flashback aren't doing quite enough. This is a good spell though. Despite its removal from Desert Bloom, there's not a lack of commanders that would be happy to include this in the 99, and you may already be thinking of a place in one of your own decks, so it's kind of a win-win. Reap is the ad at the instant slot. You gotta let me have a little bit of fun, you know? This is an old spell, and a heck of a gamble, because you can return up to X cards from your graveyard to your hand, where X is the number of black permanents a target opponent controls. This, of course, runs the risk of being a dead card if nobody has black, but even one permanent is about on par with an instant like Grapple with the Past, which is a perfectly reasonable budget add to this deck. 2 black permanents, or 2 returned cards, is a great rate for an instant version of this effect. Once you're above 2, you're in the money. The upside is so darn high with this spell, and I think outweighs the admittedly problematic 0 opponents in black eventuality. Reap is $1.33. If Reap is a bit too spooky, Grapple with the Past is only 11 cents. The instant being cut is Heaven and Earth. Heaven being the instant, with Earth being a sorcery with Aftermath. Plainly put, this deck has access to white. If you want a board wipe, go find any of the million of those white versions and toss them into this deck. There's not really a reason you need to have this one in your 99. Your Cowboy Cacti even have reach, making Heaven even less exciting than it already is. The Artifact Edition Brass's Tunnel Grinder is going to put all of those cards you got back with Reap to good use. At 2 and a red, it enters the battlefield and lets you discard any number of cards to then draw that many cards plus 1. Having these kinds of mass discard outlets helps at every stage of the game. Getting lands into your graveyard early to help cast Yuma, turning deserts into 4/2s when Yuma is on the battlefield, or even just to dig for your top end threats. The Tunnel Grinder will get a board counter on your end step if you descended on your turn, which this deck wants to do just about every turn. When it has 3, it turns into a land that can discover when it's used to cast a permanent spell. Brass's Tunnel Grinder is 80 cents. There are only 5 artifacts in the deck, and honestly, there aren't really any that stand out as obviously worse than the others. But the rules are the rules, so I'm cutting Swiftfoot Boots. These are obviously really good for the hexproof alone, but the vast majority of the creature value is not coming from attacks or even dealing combat damage, but from entering the battlefield, having lands enter the battlefield, or their passive abilities. I don't blame you for a second if you want to keep the boots in, but there are better places for them. Valakut Exploration is the enchantment edition. At 2 and a red, you get a landfall trigger that will exile the top card of your library, letting you play it until the end of your turn. Unlike normal impulse draws, if you choose not to play the card, rather than it remaining in exile, it will instead be put in your graveyard at the beginning of your end step. Not only is this card advantage, it's another desert to graveyard pipeline for Yuma. But it doesn't stop there. The enchantment will also deal damage to each opponent, equal to the amount of cards that enter the graveyard through this enchantment's ability. Valakut Exploration's got a little bit of everything, and you can find it for $1.21. There's even less enchantments in the deck than there are artifacts, and I find it to be the weakest selection of the card types. But I can't cut more than one, cause the rules are still the rules, so I'm going with Crawling Sensation. Generally, I'm not a fan of non-creature spells that don't start accruing value until your following turn, and the value of this first ability is not worth the wait. The second ability you don't have to wait for though, and if you could create an insect each time a land was put into your graveyard, you could sign me right up. but the first time each turn is too limited, especially with the kind of shenanigans you can pull off with this deck. Survivor's Encampment is the land edition. This is an untapped desert that can produce a colorless mana or any color mana with the help of an untapped creature. There are 25 legal deserts in this color combination, and with the inclusion of Survivor's Encampment, the deck total will increase to 16. I would caution you before full sending all 25 in the deck, but I'm gonna let you live your life. In any case, Survivor's Encampment is 33 cents. A basic Plains is going to be the cut. I might have cut the Sunscorched Divide or Crowsand Verge, but you'll survive missing out on a turn 1 play with the former, and the latter has Scattered Groves and Sheltered Thicket to fetch, which will keep it around for now. On the screen, you can find the 6 cards going in the deck and the 6 cards coming out, totaling out to $4.72. But I told you at the beginning, I've got at least a dozen more spells coming your way. So please join me in the first presentation of Vomiting Cards at You. Greater Gargadon can be suspended for a single red mana. While it's out there in the ether, it's a free, though temporary, land sacrifice outlet. Having that option available to you presents all sorts of fun things you can do, from creating a surprise blocker to sacking all of your lands for a wide board of Cowboy Cacti and this 9/7 to close out a game. Greater Gargadon is a very cheap 8 cents. Shigeki Jukai Visionary fills your graveyard and ramps you with its first ability. It's also another path for deserts to find their way into your graveyard. The second ability can get anything you want, as long as it isn't legendary, out of your graveyard and back into your hand. You can do more looping with deserts, get some removal, some win conditions. There's a lot to like, and you can find it for 55 cents. Tilling Treefolk is another desert looper. Probably not the best spell to have in your opening hand, but it further enables Yuma to do his thing. It's also got a cute synergy with Kiri Talented Sprout. It's a Treefolk, so she will give it +2/+0, and let you get it back in hand from your graveyard during your post-combat main phase. Tilling Treefolk is 11 cents. Dance of the Tumbleweed you may already have in your collection if you've been cracking packs of Thunder Junction. This is one of the new spree spells that can be cast for 3 mana to put a desert or basic land from your library onto the battlefield. You can cast it for 5 mana to create an elemental with power and toughness equal to the number of lands you control, or you can cast it for 6 to do both. Making sure you have consistent access to your deserts is key, and this sorcery does that with upside. It's only 7 cents. World Soul Rage has made massive waves in Standard as part of the Teamer Analyst deck. For a red and a green, you can cast this spell with X, dealing X damage to any target and putting X lands from your hand or graveyard onto the battlefield tapped. This isn't a reliable win condition like it is in Standard, but both of these effects are fantastic in Desert Bloom. The land part is obviously based, but the damage shouldn't be discounted because, again, it can target anything. This sorcery is $1.61, and the other part of that Standard deck, Aftermath Analyst, is $2.23. Hull Breach is that good removal Gruul is so famous for, destroying a target artifact, a target enchantment, or one of each. At only a red and a green, this will always be a solid piece to at least consider when you're in these colors. Hull Breach is 62 cents. Faithless Looting is another one of those spells you always gotta consider, and you may already have it laying around. In this case, it can get lands in your graveyard early to cast Yuma. Deserts in your graveyard for plant tokens let you dig further into your deck at any point, and can be cast again from the graveyard. It's a solid add, and is only 23 cents. Decaying Time Loop discards your hand and draws you that many cards. If it stopped there, it isn't worth considering, but the retraceability, letting you cast it from your graveyard when you pay the additional cost of discarding a land, makes this spicy. Retrace isn't like Flashback, where the spell gets exiled. It'll stick around in your graveyard, at the ready for whenever you want to call upon it. All this at instant speed is even better. Decaying Time Loop is only 14 cents. Entish Restoration sacrifices a land to get 2 basic lands from your library onto the battlefield tapped. If you control a creature with power 4 or greater, that turns into 3 lands. Yuma's got 6 power, the cacti have 4, and this can be cast at instant speed. Mamma mia. Entish Restoration is $1.15. Pollen Remedy is not a spell that sees commander play, so I want to show it some love. It prevents 3 damage, divided among any number of creatures or players you choose. If you pay the kicker cost, sacrificing a land, you can prevent 6 damage. 6 damage is not insignificant, and if you manage to sacrifice a desert with Yuma on the battlefield, you've got yourself another blocker as well. Pollen Remedy is 18 cents. Zurin Orb is a free spell and a free land sacrifice outlet that gains you 2 life each time, and you can find it for 21 cents. Key to the City, shout out to EDH Recast, can be tapped to discard a card, making a target creature unblockable. This can get a desert from your hand into the graveyard and give a free path for Yuma or any other creature you choose to attack. This artifact is 24 cents. Need for Speed is another land sacrifice outlet, this time giving a target creature haste. This is a cool one because you can sacrifice all your deserts for all your cowboy cacti and then sack 1 additional land, giving all those new tokens haste when targeting correctly. I just really like the idea of sacrificing all your lands to win a game. It's kind of an all-time Hail Mary play, and that makes for some memorable stories. Need for Speed is $1.24. Fall of the Thran is mean, but will also put you in a better position than most other decks you'll face off against, given what this deck is trying to do. You should probably talk with your pod to see if they care about mass land destruction before rolling this out. But if you're in the clear, this enchantment could tip the scales of the game heavily in your favor. Fall of the Thran is 24 cents. 3 land adds are Terramorphic Expanse, Escape Tunnel, and Cabaretti Courtyard. These lands will end up in the graveyard to help cast Yuma and help fix your mana. And not for nothing, this deck is not absent of landfall triggers, and taking the deck in that direction is totally viable. These next few are not budget options, but I would be remiss not to include them somewhere in the video. Spelunking does a whole lot of things, but the last ability, having your lands enter untapped, would be big in this deck. There are a lot of ways lands can enter the battlefield tapped under your control, and even if you invest in the mana base, 8 of the deserts unconditionally enter tapped. This enchantment will speed up your game, and you can find it for $3.33. Conduit of Worlds lets you play lands from your graveyard, always good. It also has the upside of letting you cast any non-land permanent spell from your graveyard as the only spell you can cast in a turn. There's a good amount of milling effects in the deck, and this gives you the chance to play your Omnaths or Titanias that you may have not otherwise been able to cast. This artifact is $4.42. Life from the Loam is probably the top build add to this deck, for good reason. You're milling cards, you're getting lands back in hand, and it's only 1 and a green. It just hits all the right notes, specifically notes played on the banjo. This sorcery is $6.60. And now this video is over. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, comment about what you had for breakfast, but you better not comment about what you had for lunch. I'll catch you next time for some more monkeying around.